My daughter took my social security check and ran off to the beach, leaving me with no food. She came back sun-kissed and cheerful, clearly expecting to find me begging for help. But the moment she opened the refrigerator to make herself dinner, she screamed in horror at what she saw inside. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin this story, a story of betrayal and the day I finally chose myself, I ask you to support this channel. Please subscribe and press the like button. It helps stories like this reach others. And write in the comments which city or country you are listening from. It always warms my heart to see how many of us there are. And now, enjoy the story. The front door had slammed shut 3 hours ago, but the heavy, sugary scent of Quintessa's perfume still lingered in the hallway. That fragrance always felt too loud to me, too intrusive for our old brownstone with its high ceilings, where the air was used to smelling like settled dust and dried lavender. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the closed pantry door. The silence in the house was absolute, almost ringing. I used to love that silence. It meant peace after long hours at the sewing machine, when my eyes ached from tiny stitches and my back throbbed from endless bending. But today, the silence felt predatory. It felt like it was waiting. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. It's shameful to admit, but I was hungry. Just normal, human hunger, the kind that grows persistent by evening. I walked to the cabinet. The hinges creaked, as if complaining about being disturbed. I remembered how she stopped in the doorway, already wearing her shoes, and held out her hand. "Mama, give me your card, just in case. What if the ATM down there doesn't work or something?" "But, Quintessa," I tried to protest, a chill running down my spine. "That's my entire social security check. What am I supposed to live on for 2 weeks?" "Oh, don't start." She rolled her eyes and snatched the plastic card from my fingers. "You've got a full jar of grits. Boil them, add a little butter, and it's perfect. It'll be good for you to detox. Doctors recommend diets for everyone your age. Don't invent problems where there aren't any. I deserve this vacation." And then she left. She flew off to Miami, to the sun, to cocktails with tiny umbrellas, taking my money, my peace of mind, and, as it turned out, my food with her. Grits. Right. She had mentioned grits. I reached for the top shelf where the old glass jar stood, labeled grits in my own handwriting from 20 years ago. The jar felt suspiciously light. I opened the lid and looked inside. At the bottom, mixed with grayish dust, lay a few lonely grains. There wasn't enough to feed a sparrow, let alone a grown woman. She had lied. Or maybe she just didn't care. She hadn't even checked if there was food before sentencing me to this starvation diet. She threw out words to silence my worry and forgot about me the moment she called her Uber. My chest went cold. Not the cold of a draft, but the kind that spreads from inside when you realize the person. Quintessa often scattered coins from her jeans pockets. I went to her room. Chaos ruled there. Clothes lay draped over chairs. Open lipstick tubes cluttered the vanity. Crumpled receipts littered the floor. I searched methodically, under glossy magazines, along the surfaces. Nothing. The jewelry dish was empty. Then I noticed a crumpled piece of paper near the trash can, missing it by inches. I bent down and picked it up. It was a printout of her hotel reservation and flight itinerary. I smoothed it on the table. The letters blurred before my eyes, but the total cost jumped out immediately, bold, black, and merciless. The amount she had spent on 2 weeks of beach relaxation equaled 3 months of my benefits. 3 months. I stood there in the half-darkness of her room, feeling the walls close in. For years, I had darned my stockings. I had turned coats inside out and remade them, coats I'd worn since before the turn of the century. I denied myself an extra peach so I could buy her the best shoes for school, then college, then simply because. "Mama, this is what's in style now." I walked out of her room and shut the door firmly behind me, as if cutting myself off from the smell of carelessness and betrayal. The living room greeted me with silent grandeur. In the glow of streetlights filtering through heavy velvet curtains stood my treasures, and my jailers. In the hall closet hung fur coats smelling of mothballs, which Quintessa mocked as dust collectors, though they were worth a fortune. I looked around the room. This wasn't a home. It was a museum. The Quintessa Johnson Museum. And I wasn't the mistress of the house. I was the unpaid curator, shuffling around in worn slippers, dusting exhibits, starving so that one day someone could come and take everything without even saying thank you. My stomach growled again, but this time something else rose with it. Not anger, anger is hot. This was clarity. Icy, crystal clear clarity. I walked to the coffee table where a stack of old newspapers lay. Quintessa always scolded me for keeping them. Junk, trash, she'd say. But I knew the classifieds held what I needed. I had seen the ad a week earlier, circled it in pencil out of habit, never admitting I might need it. I flipped through the papers until I found it. The City Chronicle. The page with private ads. The faint red circle was still there. Mr. Alistair Sterling. I buy antiques, porcelain, silver, rarities. Honest appraisal. House calls. I looked at the telephone. Old rotary. Reliable. Grits, you say? I whispered into the empty room. I lifted the receiver. The dial tone was long and steady. I turned the dial, number by number, each click feeling like I was cracking a safe where my life had been locked away. It rang. 1, 2, 3. Hello, a man's voice answered, slightly raspy but polite. Listening. The doorbell cut through the silence of the brownstone, making me flinch. I hadn't slept, spending the night in an armchair facing the buffet like a guard watching over treasures before surrendering them. But the enemy was no longer poverty. The enemy was my own obedience. I opened the door. A man in his 60s stood there, wearing a neat gray overcoat and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked scholarly and composed, but his sharp, observant eyes revealed someone used to judging not just objects, but people. "Mrs. Yulee?" he asked, tilting his head. "I'm Alistair. We spoke yesterday." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Don't bother taking off your shoes." He entered the living room, his gaze sliding over the walls, the heavy furniture, the paintings. He had expected cheap trinkets and silver-plated junk, not this. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You have an interesting home," he said carefully. "This isn't a home," I replied. "It's a storage facility." I went to the sideboard and took out the heavy case lined with worn velvet. The latch clicked. I opened it. On the dark green lining lay 12 massive silver spoons, their handles engraved with intricate vines and the intertwined monograms of my great-grandparents. Quintessa loved them. She would stroke the cold metal and say, "When I get married, Mama, we'll eat cake with these every anniversary." This was her dowry, one she hadn't even bothered to take before burning through my money. Mr. Sterling pulled on white cotton gloves, took out a loupe, and bent over the table. Silence filled the room, broken only by his breathing and the soft, Gorham Chantilly pattern, he murmured. "Early production. The condition is remarkable." "These were hardly used." "Never," I corrected. "They were admired." He straightened, removed his glasses, and looked at me with fresh interest. "This is a rare and valuable set. Offering scrap price would be a crime. I can offer you," he named a sum. It was impressive. Equal to 5 of my monthly checks. A month ago, I would have fainted with joy, grabbed the money, and hidden it under my mattress for a rainy day. But today, something different woke up inside me. Years spent in fabric markets, where I argued over every inch of silk just to save my clients a few cents, suddenly spoke up inside me. "No," I said firmly. Alistair blinked. "Excuse me?" "This is Gorham." "Early period," I repeated his own words, looking him straight in the eye. "A complete set in the original case, without a single scratch. You will sell this to a collector for 3 times what you offered me." "I'm not asking for market price, Mr. Sterling." I'm asking for a fair dealer's price. I named my number. It was 40% higher than his offer. He chuckled, wrinkles gathering at the corners of his eyes. You, Mrs. Yulee, are not as simple as you look. Life teaches you, I replied calmly. He paused for a moment, clearly deciding whether to push back, then seemed to realize he wasn't dealing with a desperate old woman, but a business partner. All right, he said. Deal. 10 minutes later, he was gone, taking the case with him, and I stood in the middle of the room gripping a thick stack of bills. My heart was pounding up in my throat. It wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. I slipped it into my purse, put on my best beige cashmere coat saved for special occasions, and walked out the door. My feet carried me not to the usual discount supermarket with yellow price tags and limp cabbage, but downtown, to the Epicurean market. I hadn't been there in 15 years. The prices there used to scare me just to look at the windows, but today I wasn't looking. The heavy door swung open, and the smell of fresh baking, coffee, and expensive spices rolled over me. I walked past the shelves like a queen returning from exile. I didn't glance at potatoes. I didn't hunt for discounted pasta. I went straight to the deli counter. Half a pound of prosciutto di Parma, I told the clerk, and some Virginia ham. Then the cheese section. A wedge of aged Parmesan, a soft brie with truffles. A jar of almond-stuffed olives. A fresh baguette, still warm and crusty. And then I saw them. Peaches, huge and velvety, glowing with sunshine, resting on a woven tray. Out of season, imported, absurdly expensive. 2, I said. The most beautiful ones. Finally, the seafood counter. Cold smoked salmon, thin and translucent, the color of sunset. I left the market with 2 paper bags. They weren't heavy, but they held more life than all my stores of grits over the last 10 years. At home, I didn't eat in the kitchen on the oilcloth. I went into the living room. I took out the snow-white tablecloth with handmade lace that Quintessa never allowed me to use. You'll stain it, Mama. That's for guests. I arranged the food carefully. Ham rolled into rosettes, cheese cut into neat cubes, olives, salmon, warm bread broken by hand so crumbs fell freely onto the tablecloth, and the peach. I bit into it, sweet juice running over my lips. The taste was unbelievable. It wasn't just food. It was freedom. It was the taste of knowing I exist, that I matter, that my body, my hunger, my wishes count. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, washing it down with black tea from a ceremonial cup. I looked at the blank wall where the calendar used to hang and realized I had spent my life saving things for a future that might never come. I lived waiting for someone to appreciate my sacrifices. But sacrifices aren't appreciated. They're used. When I finished, only crumbs were left on the plate. I felt full in a way I hadn't felt in years, a calm, dignified fullness. I stood and walked to the sideboard. The space where the spoon case once stood gaped empty, dust outlining a pale rectangle. I pulled the long gourmet receipt from my coat pocket, smoothed it carefully, and placed it right in the center of that rectangle, where the family silver had been. The word total stood out clearly. I smiled at my reflection in the glass. Dinner, I whispered. It was just dinner. The week passed like one long, bright day. I woke not to an alarm to chase discounts, but when sunlight touched my pillow. I ate croissants with butter instead of watery oatmeal. One afternoon, as I sat in the armchair with a glass of rich red wine, a 2015 Cabernet recommended by the sommelier, the phone rang. The ring was sharp and demanding. I knew who it was without answering. How are you doing there? Still alive? The fake concern mixed with her obvious superiority made the wine taste sour for a moment. Alive, Quintessa, I said calmly. She laughed loudly, shouting over the surf. You're probably bored and hungry. Boil those grits, but add more water. It's more filling. Grandma's old recipe, remember? I took another sip of wine. The velvety taste returned, washing away her words. I'm managing, I said. Don't worry. Oh, come on, she chuckled. Don't act brave. I know you've got nothing to eat, but it's fine. Just hold on another week. I saw a fridge magnet shaped like a dolphin for you. If you don't run up the electric bill while I'm gone. You know you forget to turn off the bathroom light, and I'll have to pay for it later. She spoke to me like a careless child, like a burden that needed control even from far away. Before, I would have rushed to explain myself. I would have said I was saving, that I barely used electricity. But now I just smiled at my reflection in the dark window. I'm finding resources you didn't even know existed, I said, glancing at the wine bottle. So don't worry about the lights. Resources? She laughed again, full of smugness. What, found some change in the sofa? Went to Miss Theodosia for salt? Don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors. Don't go begging. I've got to go. Pool party. Don't get bored there with your porridge. Click. She hung up, completely certain of her power over me. In her world, I was sitting in a dark kitchen, choking on plain porridge, counting days until her return, grateful for a cheap magnet and fresh criticism. She thought she had broken me, that the hunger lesson worked. Pool party, I repeated softly, setting the empty glass down. Well, I have my own plans. I picked up the notebook by the phone. On the open page was already written, tomorrow, 11 o'clock sharp. Alicester S. I had planned to sell the wardrobe, that huge antique oak closet in the hallway that ate up space and snagged my sleeves. It was valuable, but I hated it. A dark thing that swallowed light. After talking to Quintessa, I changed my mind. The wardrobe was too much effort. Movers, noise, dust. I wanted something more elegant, something that would sting as sharply as her advice about watering down grits. I went to the bedroom dresser. In the top drawer was a smaller jewelry box. I opened it. Inside lay a brooch, antique gold shaped like a twig with leaves, studded with small diamonds and a large dark ruby at the center. The ruby glowed like a drop of thick blood. Quintessa adored this brooch. She never asked permission. She just took it for dates and office parties. It's vintage, Mama. Everyone loves this now, she'd say, pinning it to her blazer. She thought it was hers, like the apartment, like me. I lifted it into my hand. The stone was cold, then quickly warmed against my palm. I remembered how she once broke the clasp and didn't even apologize. Fix it. You're a seamstress, she'd said. And I fixed it. In the morning, Mr. Sterling arrived, punctual as always. Good morning, Mrs. Yulee, he said with a polite smile. Ready to part with the giant in the hallway? I shook my head and invited him in. I changed my mind about the wardrobe, Alicester. Too much trouble. But I have something else. Pool party, I repeated softly, setting the empty glass down. Well, I have my own plans. I picked up the notebook by the phone. On the open page was already written, tomorrow, 11 o'clock sharp. Alicester S. I had planned to sell the wardrobe, that huge antique oak closet in the hallway that ate up space and snagged my sleeves. It was valuable, but I hated it. A dark thing that swallowed light. After talking to Quintessa, I changed my mind. The wardrobe was too much effort. Movers, noise, dust. I wanted something more elegant, something that would sting as sharply as her advice about watering down grits. I went to the bedroom dresser. In the top drawer was a smaller jewelry box. I opened it. Inside lay a brooch, antique gold shaped like a twig with leaves, studded with small diamonds and a large dark ruby at the center. The ruby glowed like a drop of thick blood. Quintessa adored this brooch. She never asked permission. She just took it for dates and office parties. It's vintage, Mama. Everyone loves this now, she'd say, pinning it to her blazer. She thought it was hers, like the apartment, like me. I lifted it into my hand. The stone was cold, then quickly warmed against my palm. I remembered how she once broke the clasp and didn't even apologize. Fix it. You're a seamstress, she'd said. And I fixed it. In the morning, Mr. Sterling arrived, punctual as always. Good morning, Mrs. Yulee, he said with a polite smile. Ready to part with the giant in the hallway? I shook my head and invited him in. Old mine-cut diamonds. This piece has character. How much? I asked. He named a price. It was twice what he had paid for the spoons, an amount you could live on comfortably for 6 months or waste on 2 careless weeks of paradise. It's yours, I said. This time I didn't bargain. The price was fair, and my need to get rid of the thing was almost painful. When Alistair counted out the bills, I looked at the brooch one last time. It lay on the table, catching a ray of sunlight. Beautiful, predatory. You know, Alistair said as he slipped the brooch into a special pouch, this item must have a history. It does, I said, taking the money. But that history is over. Now it's just stone and metal. He left, and once again I was alone. I looked at the empty place in the jewelry box where the ruby had always lain. Emptiness. But this emptiness didn't scare me. It felt like a promise. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of the food delivery service from that restaurant I always passed by, the one where I used to lower my eyes so I wouldn't see the prices on the menu outside. Good afternoon, I said. I'd like to place an order. Yes, delivery. Please write this down. Crab and avocado salad, veal medallions with mushroom sauce. I paused for a second, remembering Quintessa's words about water in the grits. And a bottle of champagne. The coldest you have. I hung up and felt something inside me tighten and spring, like a coiled wire. Quintessa would be back in a week. She would look for her favorite vintage brooch, wanting to show off her tan and her new jewelry to her girlfriends. Let her look. In the meantime, I would drink to her health, and to the fact that I really had found resources. Not in the sofa, but in the self-respect I had finally bought back. The champagne sparkled in the glass, tiny bubbles rising from the bottom, but the festive feeling vanished the moment I opened the bottom drawer of the secretary desk. I was looking for the certificate to a painting, a late 19th century landscape with a river by an unknown artist that hung in the living room. Alistair had hinted that with proper papers, the price would be higher. The drawer was crammed with old receipts, warranty cards for appliances that had broken years ago, and other useless papers Quintessa had dumped here over time. Irritated, I began sorting through them, setting aside instructions for an iron and a hairdryer. Then my fingers touched a thick plastic folder shoved deep beneath a pile of old Essence magazines. The folder wasn't mine. I never bought things in such loud, bright red colors. I pulled it out into the light. Inside were several sheets stapled together. On top lay a glossy brochure. Cheap paper, poor printing, blurry photos of smiling elderly people playing checkers. Restful Meadow State Facility for Veterans and Seniors. The name rang a bell. I had heard it somewhere before. Miss Theodosia, the neighbor, had spoken of it in whispers, said it smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage, that the staff was rude, that old people lay there for days staring at the ceiling because no one cared. It was a state institution, the cheapest one, with a terrible reputation, a place where people were sent to wait for the end, to be forgotten. My hands began to shake. I set the brochure aside and picked up the next document. It was a draft, a general power of attorney. My details were printed at the top. A date was penciled in the margin. Next month. Right after her return. The world tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. The air in the room turned thick, heavy. This wasn't just selfishness. This was a plan. A cold, carefully calculated plan. She wasn't just waiting for me to die and collect the inheritance. She was tired of waiting. She had decided to lock me away. To send me to Restful Meadows like an old thing to a scrapyard, free up the apartment, sell the antiques, and live easily on my money while I rotted in a government ward. She smiled at me, took my bank card, went to the sea at my expense, knowing that in a month she would throw me out of my own home. I didn't cry. Instead, a wave of such fury rose inside me that I thought I might scream, but I stayed silent. That fury hardened into resolve. If before I had sold things just to survive and indulge myself a little, now it was war. I shoved the folder back into the drawer but didn't close it, leaving it there as a reminder. I grabbed the phone. The ringing seemed endless. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice tight as a stretched wire. "It's Ollie. Have you gone far?" "I'm still in the neighborhood, Yuli," he replied, surprised. "Did something happen? Did you find something else interesting?" I found a reason. I cut him off. "Come back. And bring a truck. We're clearing everything out." "Everything?" Disbelief crept into his voice. "Mrs. Ully, are you sure? That's a serious decision." "Absolutely. I'm selling the painting, the clock, the rug, the porcelain service in the buffet was wrapped in bubble wrap. The Persian rug, worn but still luxurious, was rolled into a heavy cylinder. I stood and watched the room empty. With every item removed, it became easier to breathe, as if they were carrying away not furniture, but stones from my soul. The apartment grew lighter, more spacious, more mine. No longer a museum, just a place to live. Alistair wrote checks and counted cash. The sum kept growing. It became indecently large for a pensioner. "Are you sure you won't regret this?" he asked quietly as the movers carried out the last box of porcelain. "I'll regret only one thing, Alistair," I said, looking at the bare wall. "That I didn't do this sooner." When the door closed behind them, I was left alone in the echoing hallway. In my hands was a bag stuffed with money, a real fortune. I didn't hesitate. First, I called a cleaning company. I need a deep clean. Windows, walls, floors, everything. I want it to smell of freshness, not old age. "Can you come today?" "I'll pay double." The dispatcher choked on the other end but quickly agreed. Then I opened the website of an elite gourmet boutique, the kind that delivers groceries to stars and tycoons. I scrolled through the catalog without looking at prices. Black caviar, beluga, 4-ounce jars, 8-ounce jars, add to cart. Truffles, white, seasonal, add to cart. Foie gras, whole duck liver, add to cart. Vintage champagne, Dom Perignon. Exotic fruits, dragon fruit, mangosteen, papaya. Add to cart. Cheeses, cured meats, handmade chocolates. I ordered a huge bouquet simply because I could. The doorbell rang. The courier wasn't alone. Two of them struggled with massive thermal boxes. We went into the kitchen. The old Kelvinator refrigerator, humming like a tractor, stood in the corner. I flung the door open. Inside it was empty and spotless, a single bulb lighting the white shelves. "Load it," I said. The couriers exchanged glances, then got to work. Blue tins of caviar lined the top shelf in neat rows. Beside them lay blocks of golden butter and packets of truffles. The middle shelf filled with cheeses and cured meats. In the vegetable drawer, instead of carrots and beets, bright, alien fruits now lay. Bottles of champagne rested on their sides in the rack. The fridge was filling up, growing heavy, dense, rich. The shelves sagged almost imperceptibly under the weight of luxury. There was enough food here to feed a platoon, if that platoon lived on delicacies alone. "Anything else?" one courier asked, wiping his forehead. "Yes," I said. "Try to squeeze that box of Belgian chocolates into the door." When they finished, the refrigerator was packed to the brim. There wasn't space left even for a matchbox. This wasn't a fridge anymore. It was an edible cave of Alibaba. I paid, left a generous tip, and closed the door behind them. Then I walked back to the refrigerator, took the handle, and opened it. The light from the bulb reflected off the gold foil of the champagne bottles and the glossy sides of the caviar jars. The cold air didn't smell of soup or medicine, it smelled of wealth. I stood, surveying the abundance. This was my answer, 2 weeks of silence ended exactly at noon, when a key scratched in the lock. I sat in the kitchen, back to the hallway, drinking tea, no ordinary tea, but Darjeeling, tart, fragrant, in a thin, almost transparent cup. I didn't flinch. I waited. The door crashed open, slamming into the wall. The street's chaos and the smell of hot asphalt and airplane fuel burst inside. "Mama, I'm home." Quintessa's voice boomed like a victor's fanfare. "I hope you've humbled yourself enough to apologize for your behavior. I'm tired and don't want to hear whining." The sound of heavy suitcase wheels dragged across the parquet. She entered, expecting darkness, the smell of medicine, a hunched figure rushing to greet her with slippers. She expected her victim, broken, hungry, guilty. Instead, she was met with the scent of fresh lilies from the enormous bouquet on the floor, and the subtle trace of my new perfume, sandalwood and jasmine. Quintessa froze on the threshold, sniffing, trying to understand. What is that smell?" she asked suspiciously. "Air freshener?" She stepped forward, then stopped. The sound of her heels echoed. Confusion crept into her voice. "Why, is it so spacious in here?" Her gaze swept the room. The Persian rug was gone. The grandfather clock corner was empty. Clean walls glowed with light. "Mama," she called out. She walked past me like I was furniture. I sat straight, shoulders squared in a new emerald silk robe. She didn't notice. Hunger and habit led her. She reached for the fridge handle, already preparing a tirade about emptiness and bad hosting. "Open it," I said softly. Quintessa yanked the door with force, flinging it open. The light flared. She screamed, not in pain, but pure terror. Before her lay her inheritance. Stacked blue tins of beluga caviar at eye level, dozens of jars gleaming. Vintage Dom Perignon bottles glared from the middle shelf. Wheels of blue cheese, truffles sparkling like jewels, dragon fruits in bright pink, golden mangoes, purple mangosteens. The door held Belgian chocolates and foie gras. The fridge groaned with abundance, a feast in the midst of a plague. The plague she had created, my supposed poverty. She stood frozen, hands to her mouth, eyes wide. Her gaze darted from caviar to champagne to truffles, refusing to process it. A poor pensioner, boiling watered-down grits, could not have a fridge like an Arab sheik. What is this?" she squealed. Her hands trembled as she touched a jar of caviar, icy and heavy. "Where from?" I turned slowly to her. No fear, no love, only calm. "I was hungry, Quintessa," I said simply. "You took my card, left me an empty jar, and a person needs to eat. So I improvised." She clutched a caviar jar like a grenade. Metal clinked against her rings. "What does this mean?" she shrieked. "Where did you get the money? Did you steal? Take a loan? Do you realize the interest?" She didn't wait for an answer. She darted around the kitchen, eyes feverish. Then she froze, looking down the hallway toward the living room. It dawned on her, the emptiness. She threw the jar onto the table, it rolled, nearly knocking over my cup, and ran to the living room. Drawers opened with frantic clattering, her screams full of panic. "Where's the jewelry box, Mama?" "The spoons," she gasped, holding the empty velvet case like the maw of a dead beast. "The ruby brooch, the clock. Where's the clock?" She looked at every missing item, the light rectangles on the wallpaper, the bare parquet, the empty corner where the rug had been. "We've been robbed," she exclaimed, panic twisting her face. "Someone must have broken in. Call the police." She grabbed her phone, fingers shaking. "No police, Quintessa," I said quietly, ice in my voice. I set the cup down. Clink. A short, sharp period to her hysteria. "What do you mean, no police?" she gasped. "They took nothing," I said, meeting her gaze calmly. "I sold it." The phone slipped from her hand. Thud. "Sold it," she whispered, alien, incomprehensible. "To whom? Why?" "I told you." I was hungry. I stood and picked up the jar of caviar, relishing its cold weight. You took my check, left me empty, so I decided to eat. Yesterday, I had your brooch for breakfast on toast with butter. It went down wonderfully. And your grandfather's clock? Mahogany has a fine aftertaste, especially with Chateau Margaux. I saw it then, the gears in her head grinding. The empty walls, the stocked fridge, my calm presence. Horror shifted to anger, then to the dawning realization of monstrous loss. She looked at the jar in my hand not as food, but as liquid gold. As her apartment. Her comfort. Her life. All turned into an appetizer. Her inheritance. My breakfast. You, she hissed, stepping closer. You ate my inheritance. You ate through the antiques. Are you out of your mind? That was my money. Mine. I saved it. You saved it? I chuckled. You didn't even wipe the dust off it, Quintessa. You just waited for me to vacate the premises. You're crazy, she screamed. Senile old woman. How could you? It was a family heirloom. It was memory. Memory? I cut her off. Memory of what? Of how we lived in poverty while sitting on chests of gold? No, daughter. They were just things, and they served their final purpose. They fed the mistress. Quintessa rushed to the refrigerator, her hands shaking. I'll save at least something, she shouted, grabbing whatever she could from the shelves. This can be returned. Sold back. I won't let you devour this. She clutched 2 jars of caviar and a bottle of champagne to her chest like rescued children. Give it back, she snapped when she saw I wasn't moving. It's mine. I'll take it back to the store. Do you have the receipt? I asked, looking at this grown woman behaving like a greedy child, her tanned face twisted with hunger. All I felt was disgust. I walked straight toward her. She retreated, pressing her back against the open refrigerator door. Put it back, I said. No, she squealed. It's money. It's my money. I slammed my palm onto the table. Bam. The sound cracked through the room. The cup jumped on its saucer. Put it back. My voice was calm and commanding. I had never spoken to her like that, not even when she was small. That is my dinner, and you have no money. Remember? You spent it all at the beach. Quintessa froze. She had never seen me like this. She was used to Mama Mouse, Mama Shadow. Now the mistress stood before her. She tried to argue, but her fingers loosened. You have no money, Quintessa, I repeated slowly. You came back to an empty apartment, to a mother with no check. You wanted me to starve? Fine. Now we'll starve together. Only I will eat caviar, and you will watch, because this is my food, bought with my money. Slowly, with a look of pure suffering on her face, she set the jars on the table. The champagne clinked softly. You'll regret this, she whispered, angry tears flashing in her eyes. You'll regret this. You're clearly not right. A normal person wouldn't do this. She straightened, and a new, frightening resolve appeared in her face. I'm calling a doctor right now. You're dangerous to yourself and others. You're selling property in a fit of madness. You need treatment, and all these transactions will be declared invalid. She turned and ran out of the kitchen, snatching her phone from the floor. Hello, 911. I need an ambulance. Psychiatric help. Urgent. My mother is having an acute psychotic episode. I stood and listened. There was no fear. I took the jar of caviar she had just been holding and calmly opened it. The click of the lid sounded like a starter pistol before the final race. Try it, I said quietly, scooping up the black pearls with a spoon. Try to prove it. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Quintessa darted around the hallway like a wounded animal, grabbing her phone, running to the window. Finally, she exhaled and flung the door open. Come in quickly. She's in the kitchen. She's completely inadequate. But there were no orderlies in white coats on the threshold. There stood Miss Theodosia, our upstairs neighbor, in her eternal floral housecoat, and behind her loomed Mr. Sterling. He had come to collect the last box of books we had agreed on earlier. Quintessa? Miss Theodosia blinked, staring at the disheveled daughter. What's all the screaming? I thought there was a fire. And this gentleman rang as well. Miss Theodosia, you're a witness, Quintessa cried, grabbing the neighbor by the arm and dragging her inside. Mama has lost her mind. She sold everything. Everything. Furniture, silver, paintings. She bought food with that money and is sitting there eating. It's senile psychosis. I read about it. She doesn't know what she's doing. I need confirmation to annul the deals. You've seen she was always strange. She hauled the neighbor into the kitchen, where I sat at the table, calmly spreading butter on crisp toast. I was composed. I wore the same elegant emerald robe, my hair neatly styled, light makeup on my face, something I hadn't done in 10 years. Miss Theodosia froze in the doorway. She had expected to see a mad old woman in rags, but instead saw a woman who looked better than she had in 20 years. Yuli, she asked carefully. Quintessa says, are you sick? I am perfectly healthy, Theodosia, I smiled, gesturing for her to come in. Would you like tea? Earl Grey. And a sandwich with caviar. Real caviar. Theodosia's eyes widened when she saw the table. With caviar, she repeated weakly. She doesn't understand, Quintessa screamed, stamping her foot. Don't you see? She wasted a fortune on delicacies. This is a clear sign of dementia, loss of financial control. At that moment, Mr. Sterling stepped into the kitchen. He cleared his throat politely. Pardon me, ladies. The door was open. Quintessa lunged at him like a hawk. And you? You're a scammer. You took advantage of a helpless old woman. I'll sue you. You'll return everything. My mother is incompetent. Mr. Sterling didn't flinch. He calmly placed his briefcase on a chair, took out his glasses, and put them on. Incompetent, he repeated softly. Allow me to disagree. I've worked in antiques for 40 years. I've seen many sellers, and I assure you, your mother is one of the sharpest and toughest negotiators I've ever met. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. Here are the bills of sale for every item, personally signed by Mrs. Yuli. And attached to each contract is a notary certificate confirming the seller was of sound mind and memory. We arrange this precisely for situations like this. Quintessa snatched the papers, her eyes racing over the lines, seals, signatures, stamps. Everything was clean. Legally perfect. She gasped. But she's eating the money. That's not normal. And what is normal, Quintessa? Miss Theodosia suddenly spoke up. She was already sitting at the table, chewing a bite of a sandwich that cost $50 with visible pleasure. Yuli saved on you her whole life. Wore the same coat for 10 years. Did you ever buy her even a chocolate bar? And now she sold her own things to eat like a human being, and suddenly she's crazy? You don't understand, Quintessa shrieked, close to hysteria. Her plan was collapsing. Her arguments were turning to dust. That was my inheritance. She had no right. She did, Mr. Sterling said calmly, taking the folder back from her. It was her property, and she disposed of it exactly as she wished. Silence settled over the kitchen. Quintessa stood in the middle of the room, red, sweaty, humiliated. Everyone was looking at her, me with icy calm, Alistair with professional indifference, Theodosia chewing her sandwich with quiet judgment. Quintessa understood she had lost the battle over the diagnosis. Calling doctors was useless now. The police even more so. Fine, she hissed, narrowing her eyes. Fine. You won this round. Mama ate everything. Good for you. But we still have to live. And when you run out of your delicacies, who will bring you a glass of water? Me. Don't count on it. I won't forgive you for this. I live here, and I'll turn your life into hell. You'll regret not dying of hunger. She turned to leave, ready to slam the door, believing she still had one last weapon: her presence, her youth, her ability to bully me in my own home. Stop, I said. I didn't raise my voice, but something in it made her freeze. I slowly opened the table drawer, the same one where I had moved the papers from her room. You're so worried about my future, Quintessa. About who will bring me water. About where I'll live when I'm truly old. I took out the red brochure. Restful Meadow State Facility. And the draft power of attorney. Quintessa went pale so suddenly it was as if all the blood drained from her face. She recognized them instantly. Where did you get those? She whispered. I was looking for change, I said, standing up. You told me to look for loose change. I found this. I slid the brochure across the table. It stopped right in front of her. Smiling old faces stared up from the cheap glossy paper. You planned to put me there in a month, I said. It wasn't a question. You wanted to sell the apartment, take the money, and send me to die in a government ward that smells of bleach. Miss Theodosia gasped, covering her mouth. Mr. Sterling frowned, looking at Quintessa with open disgust. Mama, that's not what you think, Quintessa babbled, backing toward the door. It's just in case. It's a good sanatorium. Enough, I cut her off. I know exactly what kind of place that is. And I know what a power of attorney means. I stepped closer. You cared so much about housing for the elderly. I pressed the brochure into her limp hand. Take it. Keep it. You'll need it yourself one day. What? She blinked, not understanding. Because you won't live here anymore, I said quietly, firmly. Get out. You can't throw me out, she shrieked, finally finding her voice. I'm registered here. This is my home. This is my apartment, I said. And I changed the locks this morning. Your keys don't work anymore. I nodded toward the suitcase standing in the hallway. Your things are packed. You never even unpacked them. I'll call the police. I'll sue you. Sue, I shrugged. But while the court sorts it out, you have nowhere to live. And if you try to break down the door, Mr. Sterling will testify that you threatened me. And Theodosia too. I looked at the neighbor. She nodded firmly, setting aside the rest of her sandwich. I'll confirm it, Yuli. And I'll tell the officer she wanted to dump you in the poorhouse. Quintessa looked at the three of us, a solid wall her greed had crashed into. She understood it was over. She grabbed her suitcase. Damn you all, she screamed, her voice breaking into a shrill squeal. Choke on your caviar. I hope you die alone. She flew out of the apartment. The door slammed. Silence returned. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat softly. I should go, Mrs. Yuli. I'll pick up the books tomorrow, if you allow. Today you probably need rest. Thank you, Alistaster, I nodded. Come tomorrow. After he left, and Miss Theodosia, still gasping and muttering, went back upstairs finishing her sandwich on the way, I was alone. I walked to the door and turned the deadbolt. Click. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal. My heart beat evenly. My hands were steady. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the jar of caviar Quintessa had tried to save. It was warm from her hands. I put it back in the refrigerator, beside the champagne. Cold tastes better, I said aloud. The evening lay ahead. And a whole life. My life. 2 weeks passed, and the air in the apartment changed. It was no longer stale, no longer soaked with fear and the dust of the past. Now a light draft moved through it, fresh, smelling of autumn and change. I stepped onto the balcony, nudging the door open with my hip. In my hands was a tray with a steaming cup of coffee and a sandwich on a crisp baguette, thick with cream cheese and slices of red fish. A new wool shawl lay on my shoulders, soft, terracotta-colored, warm like an embrace I had missed for years. I bought it with money from selling an old fur coat, the very Persian lamb I had saved for 20 years, only to discover moths had eaten it. Funny how it turned out, the moths ate my coat, and I ate empty porridge to save that coat for the moths. The circle closed. I broke it. I sat down in the wicker chair. Quintessa was gone. She vanished from my life like a bad dream, leaving behind silence. After that day she called, threatened, cried, knocked on the door, but through the closed door I told her just one thing: one more call, Quintessa, and I sell the apartment. I'll move to a tiny studio by the sea and drink the money away, or donate it to a cat shelter. Choose. It worked. The apartment was her last hope, her final illusion of inheritance, and she was afraid to lose even that. She went quiet, dissolved into the city, renting a room somewhere, trying to learn how to live on her own money. I looked back into the room through the balcony glass. It was almost empty. No heavy wardrobes, no dark corners. Just light, space, and a few things I truly loved. My favorite floor lamp. A comfortable armchair. Books. I was no longer a museum curator. I was the resident. The mistress. I picked up a glossy brochure from the table. Mountain Spring Spa Resort. Snowy peaks, hot springs, smiling people in white robes. A whole month. I could afford it. The money from the silver spoons and that ugly rug I always hated burned in my pocket, asking to be turned not into things, but into memories, into life. I raised the sandwich to my mouth. The fresh bread crunched. The salty fish blended with the sweetness of butter. I closed my eyes and chewed. The taste was familiar. Strangely familiar. I knew exactly what it was. It was the taste of the diamond earrings my husband gave me for my 30th birthday. Heavy, pulling at my earlobes, worn only on special days, feared more than loved. I hated their cold weight. Now I was eating them, and they were delicious. I took a sip of coffee. Bitter and hot, like the tears I didn't shed when I found the nursing home papers. I smiled, wide and honest, turning my face toward the autumn sun. This was the taste of freedom. The taste of owing nothing to anyone. The taste of a life that belongs to me until the last breath. Until the last penny. Until the last crumb. I took another bite. And it was the most delicious bite of my life. That is the story, my dear listeners. A story about the day a cup of patience finally overflows, and a person makes a choice in favor of themselves. What do you think? Did Yuli do the right thing? After all, she essentially deprived her daughter of an inheritance. In our society, we are taught that parents must give everything to their children, down to the last shirt. But where is the line when sacrifice turns into enabling parasitism? Quintessa didn't just live off her mother, she planned to betray her in the cruelest way. Did she deserve such a lesson? Or was Yuli too harsh, sending her own daughter into the street? I want to hear your thoughts. How often do we turn our own lives into museums for someone else, postponing joy for a rainy day that might never come, or for children who may never appreciate it? Have you ever faced a moment like this, where you had to stand up for yourself? Could you act as decisively as our heroine? If this story touched your soul, please like this video, it means the world to us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Share this video with friends, maybe someone watching right now really needs to hear these words: you owe nothing to anyone except yourself. I'd love to know, did you enjoy the story, and which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I can't wait to read your comments. On the screen, you'll see 2 new life stories I highly recommend. There's so much more waiting for you on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.